nowadays the architecture courses have different focus, and some of them are more artistic, others are more concerned about theory aspects, and others are more concerned about the technical aspects. What's your opinion about the students who are starting their careers in the market? Do you think that they are prepared for the profession?
No. But that depends on what you expect from the university education, because all around the world there are different expectations of what you'll actually get out of university. Now, I gather in the United States they have the lowest expectation of what you get from university. They expect that you'll probably be about 50% ready for practice when you finish your degree. And then they have other courses and top up and all the rest of it, professional training at the end of that. In Australia, I think we aim for about 80% preparedness, and then after that you go and do your professional practice, and obviously you work in practice for a couple of years before you're allowed to become a registered architect. So for me, you're never going to be able to give students all of the skills that are needed in a technical side, so that eventually they're going to get those skills in practice. The bigger issue for me is more the ethical dimension. We probably don't give enough emphasis to the ethical aspects of architecture, so they go away with sort of a particular attitude. Because I suppose it's just my attitude that I'd like to pass on to the students, but the attitude that somehow or other we shouldn't just be sort of vehicles of capitalism and helping capitalism along. We should actually be critical. We should have a sort of a moral voice. We should be doing the right thing by the less privileged in society or in the world or whatever. But that attitude we don't necessarily build. That sort of gets lost along the way because of all the other stuff that we're trying to deliver, which is the theory, the art, the technology. So for me, all of those people will eventually get all of that, but probably the opportunity at university is to give them a particular attitude. I don't think sometimes we might be successful, but not always.
In your opinion, what are the main differences between work as an architect in the office and in the academic sphere?
So the main difference between being a student and working in an office, there's quite a few differences. We often get students to work in teams, and we lie to them and say that that's like what it's going to be like in practice. But in fact, it isn't like that in practice. But part of the reason we do it is to save on the number of tutors we need, for example. So if they work in teams in the design studio, we need less tutors. The reality is that when, for example, you're working in teams in university, there is no hierarchy. You're trying to get the students to all be equal. In practice, absolutely, you'll be part of the team for sure, but there will be somebody in charge, and everybody will have a role, and you have to follow that order, which actually makes the whole process much easier than at university, where everybody's fighting to get their ideas in. So although and certainly there's teamwork in both university and in practice, but they're quite different. And I guess the other huge difference is the reality of practice, that everything has to be both technically correct, it has to pass all the codes, it has to be economical, it has to meet the client's budget requirements. So there's all these constraints that you have to operate with. Whereas just the opposite in university, where we're constantly sort of getting students to explore, to be liberated, which you don't get that opportunity in practice. So there's rather large differences, even though we are trying to sort of prepare people for practice. They are quite different.
There is a current trend right now of the star architect, the architect whose personality is more important than his work. And this is an example of this. There are Daniel Libeskind, Rezoviano, Foster, and others. And the architecture that they produce are something monumental, sometimes with great environmental and technological performance. And in some cases, there is a lack of the quality of the space. What do you think about this kind of architecture?
No, I don't like star architecture. I think Mainly because I never made it to be one. No, I sort of agree with that. The star architecture system is really about the high end of town and the high end of architecture, where it's about architects trying to promote themselves and clients trying to promote themselves through those architects. So there's a nice connection, and that works really well for them. I mean, if you're a client, then to get a star architect to build your building, then that has all sorts of kudos, and that's very useful for promoting your firm or whatever. But the value, there are so few star architects compared with the amount of architecture that's actually produced, and it's probably pretty negligible, although the amount of media cover that they get in proportion with the number of architects that are at that level is enormous. So what the public sees of architecture is mainly that star architecture stuff. So all of the more socially oriented architecture and all the more thoughtful architecture, that doesn't show up in the media at all. So it is a distortion, I suppose, the whole star architecture system, part of the system.
Yeah, still in this topic, the architecture that they produce has the essence of meanings, and we saw in the subject that the symbols are an important element that shows the culture. And the architecture now is becoming more homogeneous, presenting the same characters. Do you think is it occurring, an standardization of the architecture now? Something about an international style?
Yeah, I don't know. I get the opposite feeling that there's a lot of diversity in what's being produced architecturally, mainly because of the market issue, that everybody wants to differentiate themselves and look different and become a star, essentially. So everybody's trying very hard to be different. So I'm not seeing uniformity. I really don't think it's very useful, just referring to the previous question, to try and be that sort of differentiated star sort of architect or produce just different architecture for the sake of different architecture. I can't see the value in that at all. But from my reading, that's what, for me anyway, seems to be happening, because at this moment you could be producing architecture that's minimalist, the sort of blob architecture, that's the leftovers of old deconstructivist architecture, that's sort of the Gehry end, or the absolutely sort of minimalist end. For me, it's sort of everywhere, but it does seem to be about the identity of the architect, or trying to promote it.
In Brazil, one of the main problems of architecture is the lack of housing for the poorest people. So the several existing initiatives to address the situations were massive and got the result of construction of a broad amount of housing. However, the quality of these houses is precarious because the companies that are responsible for them prioritize the profits over the quality of the construction. This will reflect the questioning that architects have to deal with their professional life, doing a job that's profitable or socially beneficial. Do you believe that's possible to find the balance between the both aspects?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, and I have heard, well, in a lot of countries you have a similar problem where a lot of the profits or a lot of money for social ventures just disappears into rich people's pockets. But yeah, it's a dilemma, because there are many architects who would like to do the right thing in terms of social justice, and finding, well, and obviously they can't simply do that as part of their work because they would go broke very quickly. So finding an opportunity to do both, I suppose what they call in the legal profession pro bono work. So the idea is that you make a lot of money out of your rich clients and you use that money to somehow support the work you do for the poorer clients. And I think that's valid. I'm not sure, it's certainly valid in a rich country like Australia. I don't know I mean, Brazil is fairly well off as well, but in poorer countries, there isn't necessarily the opportunity to do a lot of rich work, and therefore to have that excess to be able to work for the poor. I mean, I would prefer, I suppose this is just a socialist orientation, I would prefer if the government actually did sponsor that, then architects were actually paid to do that work, but that would have to also mean that you get rid of the corruption that goes with it, and the good quality housing and affordable housing. So it's a real dilemma, but I do support that architects should absolutely be involved in doing that sort of social housing work.
The last question.
Mm-hmm.
Your book, Turning the Tide, Architecture and
Really
Urban
good, yes.
Design for adapted to sea level rise, presents several solutions to address the problem of the sea level rise. And your research focus, one of your research focus is the sustainable design. And this problem of the sea level rise is one of the effects of the climate change. And sustainability now is a very important topic. What are the challenges for the architects related to the environment, to the sustainable aspect?
Yeah, the challenges are massive, but I think the way architecture tends to go about it is they're trying to find a technical solution to sustainability. So whether it's using sort of passive solar, environmental performance, or some sort of energy minimisation technology, or whatever, which is actually what we teach. That, in my opinion, will probably never solve the problem, because if you have people who want to live a particular lifestyle and consume a lot, the idea is, okay, let's let them continue to live that exact same lifestyle, but we'll try and minimise the impact by putting a few technological fixes on. So you're actually not changing their life, their way of living, their lifestyle at all. Probably we need an architecture that would actually force people to change the way they live, so they live consuming less, essentially, smaller houses that simply consume less resources, less land, less whatever, and people would have to live differently in them. But at the moment, all of our energy goes on all that sort of technological fix that we know so well. Partly, I think, because we don't really have enough control over clients' lives, or whatever. You can't force people to live differently. I suppose the best we can do is give them something beautiful in which they'll be encouraged to live differently in the house. But certainly the technological fix, I don't think, is going to solve the massive problem that we have.
That's good.
Good.
Thank you.
No problem. Is that long enough? Does that solve your problem for Simon?
Yeah.
Hi, Simon.